You're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96 with Melinda Francis, Norman Richmond, Lisa Watson on the buttons, and joining us on the line is Dr. Gerald Horne, who holds the John J. and Rebecca Moore's Chair of History at the University of Houston. And Dr. Horne is a regular on Diasporic Music and has been for many moons. And I guess I wanted to ask you, how are you feeling today, sir?
Oh, it's all good.
So I guess we have a lot of things to cover. I'm gonna let Melinda kick off the show.
I guess we kind of have like some loose ends. I don't know if you wanted to talk about the Xi and Biden summit. And then there's also Guyana versus Venezuela that we didn't get to last week.
Well, as you know, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit took place in San Francisco some days ago. President Xi Jinping showed up, and it was a very interesting encounter between him and Mr. Biden. It's apparent that U.S. imperialism faces a real dilemma because on the one hand, there's a certain dependence upon the People's Bank of China to help to finance the U.S. government. Secondly, there is a certain dependence by key U.S. corporations, including Apple, Tesla, Starbucks, on the Chinese market. But at the same time, there is an influential wing of the U.S. ruling class that would like to see an overthrow of the Chinese Communist Party, which could jeopardize these financial and economic interests. So it puts U.S. imperialism in a real bind. And you saw a glimpse of that when Xi Jinping at a hotel in San Francisco addressed many of the leaders of the 1%, including Tim Cook, the leader of Apple, a $1 trillion corporation, and they gave him a standing ovation. And that puts into bold relief the present duel for the US White House, because the strategic line of the Trump forces will be much less favorable to Beijing than the already hostile line of the Biden administration. That is to say, as we've said more than once, the Trump forces would like to cut a deal with Russia so they can focus like a laser beam on China. If they do that, assuming they come to power in November, which we cannot rule out, that could mean escalating tensions with China. It could force losses on these corporations. And then there are contradictions within the contradictions. What I mean by that is there was an article in the Wall Street Journal just a few days ago that talked about how U.S. tariff walls are keeping Chinese electric vehicles out of the U.S. market to the benefit of Tesla in particular. The contradiction within the contradiction is that Tesla has some of its major plants in China. And a major competitor in that market is BYD of China. Contradiction within the contradiction is that Warren Buffett of Omaha, Nebraska, one of the top 10 richest people on planet Earth, is a major investor in BYD, which has brought denunciation from Elon Musk, born in apartheid South Africa, who feels that BYD is a critical competitor. So this relationship between China and the United States is very complex, is very complicated. We see articles all the time about how increasingly Chinese nationals are crossing the border without documentation from Mexico into Texas. Thousands, we are told, in the last few weeks and months. We also have been told, and perhaps you folks can expand upon this, that Chinese nationals are flooding into British Columbia, particularly Vancouver, which I understand they're being blamed for helping to drive up housing costs. Recall that when the executive of Huawei, the Chinese competitor to Apple, was detained in Canada, she spent her time in Vancouver before being released. So I'll stop for a second and turn the mic over to you two to respond.
Well, let me say that, did you want to go first, Melinda, or I can go first? It doesn't matter to me.
You could go first.
Okay, the Chinese, historically, that's been an issue for, as the native people would say, many moons. I can remember they've had a problem. When I say they, the policymakers and the right wing has had a problem with the trying to talk about the Chinese buying up properties and ruining many things here for years. There's a publication here called the well, I wouldn't call their name, but it's a right wing publication, and it is anti-African, anti-immigrant. Ever since I've been in Canada, they have been blowing the anti-Chinese line, and the even the so-called the most liberal press here is the Toronto Star, and they're kind of mixed. When I say they're kind of mixed, they have some progressive writers there, and so ultimately they are take the same anti-China line, but every once in a while you might have a columnist, Linda McQuaig or someone like that, would come out and take a more balanced position, and even she'll get shaky from time to time. I guess everybody has to make a compromise in order to. You don't have to, but many people choose to make that compromise in order to. I don't want to lose that space in that corporate press, because the corporate press is, for the Toronto Star, I guess the largest paper in Canada, and they have a huge circulation. That's how I would respond to it. I don't know how Melinda sees it.
Well, the anti-China thing, before, in Canada specifically, I mean, there has been historical anti-China, like all the attacks. So I think with these furthering tensions, it's just going to increase. And unfortunately, I think, that's just going to continue. But that's what I mean, it's been here. It's just, going to get worse, I think. Right. So.
And let me say that I also wanted to say that, many Europeans and also other, not just Europeans, but a lot of people, period, when they see an Asian, they could be from Laos, they could be from Korea, Japan. A lot of people see everyone that's an Asian as a Chinese. That is a problem. I have, friends from Korea that get harassed and attacked because the dummies think that everyone is a Chinese. It's like all Africans are. Some of us we're all Africans, but we're from different different territories. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's a mess. It's a real mess. It's a mess is too mild of a word. It's serious, very serious.
Well,
I have a.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I just have one question, just in general, like in logistically, as a lot of interest, or sort of a lot of loans, or it's being bankrolled a lot by Chinese. So moving forward, are they going to borrow money to attack China? I'm just
Well, that's the idea.
Okay, so I wasn't mixing that up. I'm like, are they borrowing money to fight them? Like, it seems ridiculous to me. Anyway,
That's the idea. I guess that ultimately, first of all, these Yankees, they don't always think things through. That's why they always or so often end up on the losing side of these titanic battles. But secondly, to the extent that they have thought it through, I assume that if they are able to overthrow the Communist Party, then that could mean a liquidation of all of the debts, the money that the United States owes to China, and that would resolve the issue.
gotcha. Got it. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
And I think we wanted to move. I'm going. I cut you off, Joe. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, I mean, Guyana, Venezuela, the situation is heating up. The problem is a territorial dispute that goes back to the 19th century, goes back to colonial times, goes back to the contestation between Britain and Spain, and the subsequent anti-colonial regimes of Venezuela and Guyana have inherited it. Basically, it's this region on the border between the nations, a huge territory that apparently has substantial natural resources. The Venezuelans have claimed this land for oh so many decades. The complication now is that Guyana has developed these partnerships with U.S. oil corporations, including Exxon and Chevron. At the same time, the United States has eased sanctions against Venezuela because the sanctions were strangling the Venezuelan economy, causing Venezuelans to come to the United States. Folks were objecting to their presence. And so Mr. Biden decided that the better part of wisdom would be to ease up on the sanctions. So the question then becomes, if push comes to shove, and keep in mind that Venezuelans' population is about 20 times the population of Guyana, and its military obviously is more significant as well. But the question is, what will be the positions of the outside powers? Now, when Guyanese have queried me about this, my recommendation is that they should get the Cubans to mediate, because the Cubans have experience in that. They have positive relations with both sides. Obviously, they have positive relations with Venezuela and to a certain extent with Guyana as well. But in any case, it's really a kind of mess right now.
And could you talk about the fact that Guyana had, in the beginning, Guyana had UC Guyana, who's still in the land of the living, and Chetty Jagan, they were on the left, and a lot of the problems are come from the capitalist side. The Forbes Burnham faction of Guyana. I mean, or am I correct in saying that?
Well, that may be true, but the fact is that today in 2023. There's a contestation and a sharp conflict between Caracas and Georgetown, irrespective of the history.
I can see that, yes.
As a matter of fact, there was an article in the Amsterdam News just the other day about the Amsterdam News, of course, is a Black weekly, and it is partial, shall we say, to the Afro-Guyanese population. And they were denouncing what they call the, quote, Indo-Guyanese government, because this so-called Indo-Guyanese government was not willing to meet with a delegation of Black people from the United States who were coming to Georgetown because the, quote, Indo-Guyanese government, unquote, felt that this delegation was not impartial, that they were just coming to basically bolster the so-called Afro-Guyanese party, speaking of the PNC. So once again, there are contradictions within the contradiction. On the one hand, there are contradictions between Guyana and Venezuela. On the other hand, there are internal Guyanese contradictions between the Indo and African population. And that's where we can invoke history. But even if you invoke history, the problem is that those issues are still remaining.
And let me say this to close this question out. Go back and read, do some history and read. There was a big struggle between Kwame Ture and Walter Rodney on this particular question. Kwame was taking the African position, and Walter was taking the multinational position. And all you got to do is Google that. It was we had a struggle on that issue, and it's history will. All you have to do, like I say, Google it. You can find some information on it. But can we go up to talk about an update on Palestine? I wanted to say that there's a big struggle now going on at McGill University. McGill is in Montreal, very famous university. And there's a fight, there's a struggle between the students who are supporting the Palestinians, and the administration is, of course, supporting the status quo, Zionist Israel. That's taking place right here in Canada. And I would say that it looks like the Zionist Israel is really losing the battle of public opinion. I think Melinda might agree with me on that.
Yeah, I do agree with you, but I think it's not going to prevent, I think people being doxxed for that public opinion is going to get worse before it gets better.
Well, some of our friends on the left have been placed in a very ticklish position. What I mean by that is that the Zionist lobby is going after a number of leading members of the Congressional Black Caucus. And as we've said before, the New York members of the Black Caucus, including Hakeem Jeffries of Brooklyn, Gregory Meeks of Queens, they're in bed with the Zionist lobby. But others are not. Speaking of Cori Bush of St. Louis, Andre Carson of Indiana, Summer Lee of Western Pennsylvania, Jamal Bowman. Now, for some of our friends on the Black left in particular, they paint with a broad brush with regard to the caucus. To listen to them, they're all bankrupt and corrupt. So what does that mean when the Zionists go after them? That means you're going to sit on your hands and let the Zionists pick our leadership? Or are you going to revise your position and say, well, no, the Zionists should not be allowed to pick Black leadership. The constituency should be allowed to pick the Black leadership. And I think this is what happens when you paint with too broad a brush. And it's very curious. This whole crisis in Palestine is obviously having repercussions here in North America. I mean, the Zionists are doxing like crazy. I mean, they're purging. Susan Sarandon, the Oscar-winning actor, was dropped by her talent agency because of certain statements that she made that would really write rather mild if you listen to them or read them. But that's just par for the course right now. And the problem is that Israel is in a very difficult situation right now. They were forced to engage in what they call a pause. Others might call it a truce or even a ceasefire, at least until Tuesday, as hostages or detainees are released. And of course, you can use that term on both sides because many of the Palestinians have not been charged. They've been imprisoned, but not been charged. And so you can call them hostages too. also, in terms of malevolence, the Israelis, when prisoners die in their cells, the Israelis do not release the bodies. They keep them in refrigerators. This is just more torture of the Palestinians because they don't want a Palestinian mother to be allowed to weep at her child's grave. I mean, that's just more torture of the Palestinians. And it's that kind of torture that has made Hamas popular amongst Palestinians. There's all this talk about a two-state solution, including by the Chinese and the Russians. But when you talk to Palestinians, many of them do not feel that that's a realistic option right now. And they say that in part because the Israelis over the years and in recent decades, they've implanted almost 800,000 settlers on the West Bank. They've been evacuated from Gaza under pressure, as you know. And it's difficult to imagine any Israeli government removing these 800,000 settlers. Likewise, it's difficult for these 800,000 settlers to consent to remain on Palestinian soil, within a Palestinian state where they have no special privileges and they're treated like any other national. And so, given the fact that the Israeli population has moved to the right as a result of October 7th, and given on the other side of the equation the unpopularity of Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has an interest in continuing this conflict, and certainly some of his biggest backers are the settlers. Government coffers are slanted in the direction of the settlers and also in favor of the Orthodox, and there's a certain equivalence between those two groups, although not exclusively. And so the problem is when you begin to talk about a one-state solution, that does not seem to be viable because I don't think that a goodly number of the Israeli population will accept it, although a goodly number of the Palestinian population feels that that's the only way out. And so it's going to take some heavy lifting politically. It's difficult to see that heavy lifting taking place in Washington because of the strength of the Zionist lobby. It's going to have to come from Russia and China. But once again, then that runs into the Cold War, the new Cold War between Washington and Russia and China, Washington versus Russia and China. And Washington thinks that it can win popular support amongst not only the Zionist lobby, but to a certain extent amongst the Jewish American population by stymieing any Russian and Chinese efforts to put pressure on the Israeli regime, be it Prime Minister Netanyahu or one of his successors. So, in a sense, we're stuck right now. But as you know, being stuck does not last indefinitely. Probably, I'm afraid to say, what's going to happen is that Hamas will continue to arm, just as Israelis have been driven out of southern Israel into the center of the country, driven out of northern Israel into the center of the country, where they're staying in hotel rooms, being subsidized by the government at extreme and excessive costs. And it seems, I'm afraid to say, that that increased and intense pressure by Hamas will probably help to change the political situation in Israel. At least I imagine it will, although I cannot be sure of that. Certainly the Hamas leadership, they say, and of course you have to acknowledge that any force involved in the middle of a conflict will not necessarily admit weakness. But in any case, having said that, the Hamas forces say that their strength has not been dented since October 8th, since October 7th, that their tunnels are intact, that their leadership is intact, that their morale is high. So this struggle will not apparently be ending anytime soon.
You're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96 with Belinda Francis, Norman Richmond. We're on the line with Dr. Gerald Horne, the author of Acknowledging Radical Histories. Also, another book he has out is called Revoting Capital, Racism, Radicalism in Washington, D.C., 1900 to 2000. And we have a lot of other questions, but I really wanted to ask you about Argentina. I've been reading and hearing a lot about Argentina and the leadership of Argentina, and they were referring to the young man as a loco. Apparently, this guy is a real basket case. Could you talk about the leader of Argentina and the elections, and is it a setback for Brazil and Venezuela?
Well, it's certainly a setback for Brazil and Venezuela, because this guy, by his own admission, would be in the pocket of Uncle Sam. For example, he talks about dollarizing the economy. The question is, where is he going to get the dollars from? I mean, Argentina is going to have difficulty borrowing. According to the New York Times, about 10% of all U.S. currency in circulation right now is in Argentina. But that's not enough to convert the entire workforce to be paid in dollars, for dollars to be used to buy your Starbucks, etc. In any case, he doesn't control the parliament, the Congress. That's in the hands of the opposition. Javier Milei is his name. He calls himself an anarcho-capitalist. It's a setback for Brazil, because Brazil lobbied for Argentina to be admitted to the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. But now Milei says he doesn't want to be part of the BRICS. He's in the pocket of Uncle Sam. And then being in the pocket of Uncle Sam means he's going to turn up the pressure on Venezuela. Obviously, the BRICS should have thought a bit more carefully before extending this invitation. The logical choice to join the BRICS would be Mexico, except that would lead to a freakout in Washington, D.C., because they act like Mexico is the 51st state. It might even lead to a freakout in Canada, for that matter. So this is a very complicated situation in Argentina. It's certainly a setback for progressive forces. And likewise, the election in the Netherlands is a setback. You will be correct if you may detect a trend here. You had the Freedom Party, which is wildly anti-Islamic, Islamophobic, to the point where the leader of the party, who may be the next prime minister, although we're told that he won't be able to cobble together a coalition with the majority, he is under tight security because many folks want to assassinate him. It's going to be difficult, it seems to me, for him to survive. The Islamophobia is directed not only at the population of Indonesian descent, that is to say, the former colony of Holland, the Netherlands, for centuries up until the post-1945 dispensation. Then there are a number of Moroccans there as well. Now, this is also, I also find this troubling. I listened to a number of podcasts and broadcasts by specialists who target the Ukraine-Russia battlefield. And they're very informed. And I must say, they take a position that's anti-NATO. But they're weak on these sorts of elections, which is really troubling and disturbing. That is to say, you notice that you had these Dublin riots just a few days ago in Ireland, when yes, ultra-right went crazy because of this allegation that an Algerian man had stabbed some Irish children. These commentators I've just made reference to were very blasé about the anti-immigrant psychosis that represented. to step back for a second, I think that this is reflective of these changing political conditions internationally. There is a change in the global correlation of forces, and that, I think, has caused some to become disoriented and to lose their bearings. And we're going to have to deal with this for some time to come. As a matter of fact, I think coalition politics for some time to come will be on an a la carte basis. What I mean by that is, instead of going to the restaurant and ordering a fixed meal, you order a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And what I mean by that is that we may be able to align with some of these forces on anti-NATO grounds, and then cross swords with them with regard to Islamophobia, cross swords with them with regard to anti-immigrant psychosis. But obviously that weakens the overall coalition. And like the Palestine crisis that I've just described, it leaves us in quite a dilemma, the horns of a dilemma, to coin a phrase.
Mm-hmm. We only have 2 minutes left. Is there anything else you would like to add, sir?
Well, only that watch for the announcement for the book launch in Leimert Park, Los Angeles on February 3rd, likely in the early afternoon. It'll be posted at various sites, including a Facebook page of myself, likely an Instagram page of myself. So I would hope that our friends in the Southland would come, or perhaps some of you might even want to fly in to LAX to attend this event.
Well, I won't be able to do that, but I have dozens of cousins that live in that area and by that area, and I'll definitely let them come, and I will instruct them to come and see you. Since I'm the oldest one, I think I'll order, what is it, an executive mandate that they must, whatever, they have to go see Dr. Gerald Horne at his book launch and purchase at least one of his books. How you like that?
Right on.
All right. So anything you'd like to add, Melinda Francis?
No, stay safe, and we'll see everybody in the whirlwind next week.